Two very important elements in house music and electronic dance music in general are obviously kick and bass. And how you produce them, how you handle them, how you process them, how you mix them has a big impact on your final sound. Today we're going to take a look at some important fundamentals and also a specific mixing technique that you can use to make a dull kick cut through your mix a bit more and have it work nicely with your bass. All right, let's today take a look at a very classic kick and bass combination. Let's have a quick listen to what our kick and bass sound like together. Let's jump in and analyze the sound. So we have the bass drum, which is a very famous sound. It's a bass drum of a TR-909 drum machine. And then we have the bass sound, which is in this case also a sample, but it's a very famous sound called lately bass. It also comes from a specific machine, a Yamaha TX-81Z, and it's an FM synth that you can put in a rack. It's kind of similar to the DX7, and it has this very famous preset called lately bass that has been used in many 90s house and house productions. So just by recognizing these sounds and understanding where they come from, kind of get an idea about them. But now let's analyze the frequencies a little bit. So you can get spectrogram like Vox single span and analyze the frequencies of the bass drum. Okay, so typical for a 909 bass drum, you have this knock around 200 hertz, then pretty evenly present low bass and sub frequencies. And then you have this little pokey thing over here, the fundamental frequency playing at around 51, 53 hertz, a G sharp actually, okay? But as you can tell, after 200 hertz, we don't have that much happening. And then in the high end, there's not that much going on. So it's pretty strong, punchy kick, but there's not much high end. Okay, let's take a listen to the bass and a look also. I'm stopping here because that's the lowest note the bass is playing. It makes sense to kind of understand, okay, the kick is a steady sound, it's always the same, and then the bass drum is kind of playing a range of notes. And this bass sound specifically has a pretty strong sub bass. It goes down to like 45 hertz, and then relatively present bass and mid-range kind of going down a bit, some highs in here, but then not really much high in energy. So they're kind of similar. Maybe we can do some processing to kind of make them work around each other. Let's listen again together. Okay, so these two are obviously kind of fighting for low-end space. And before we even apply any processing, it makes sense to take a closer look at our bass drum, because the bass drum is actually quite long. The tail goes all the way up to 400 milliseconds. And if you haven't paid attention to the length of your bass drums, it's super important. I cannot stress that enough. Let's look at the spectrum while we also reduce the length of the kick. You see this fundamental, it's this tail over here. So if we make it shorter and punchier, some of that bass energy is already gone. And you might want to have a really long boomy kick for a techno track or whatever you're going for, but it makes sense to understand, okay, what is my kick doing? What is my bass doing? Where do they interfere? Maybe EQ isn't what you need. Maybe you need a slightly shorter kick. And how long is too long and how short is too short is obviously depends on the case, and it's quite subjective. But something that's helpful to know is that if you take a look at an audio track, that a kick is playing every quarter note. So one kick is playing in this space and then you have another kick. One quarter note at 125 BPM is 480 milliseconds long. So halfway of that would be 240 milliseconds. I would say halfway, so an eighth note, is kind of a medium length kick. You can have a very strong, punchy kick that has sub bass and it moves you in the club. and it's just below 240 milliseconds. For like a short disco kick, you could even go for half of that, 120 milliseconds, but that I would consider quite short. Anything above an eighth note, so halfway in between two kicks, is a bit longer. So if we take a look and just get the sample real quick from our browser and move it down here, as you can tell, okay, this kick almost goes all the way to our next kick. If we just record the bass and the kick together as they are, we can see there's a nice space in between the kick and bass, so they just don't cluster up and sound like one constant sound. Because that's something in my early days when I was DJing and trying songs out later, I realized, holy shit, I just hear a constant bass, like there's no separation. And before using crazy processing in EQ, take a look at the length of your notes for both the kick and the bass. All right. The next obvious step that you've probably heard about, that I'm not going to talk about too much, is sidechain compression. So we could, in order to make the bass and the kick work together, use some sidechain compression. So whenever the kick hits, the bass is being ducked, and that being that, in order for them to create some space. I'm going to talk about this in other videos, and I don't want to get too deep into it. I just wanted to say a quick thing. How your sidechain, your kick and bass will have a very big impact on the style of your sound. Because over time, when you started out old school, there was no sidechaining. Then things got more modern and modern. There were more crazy production techniques. Everything got easier because of computers and stuff. And people got more surgical. And they had crazy EQs, like the Pro Q3, where you can have 100 bands and do crazy stuff. Back then, it wasn't like this. For example, for old school 90s house, you might have something like this drum machine over here, or a groove box actually, and you will have some bass sounds coming and some drums coming. There's no side chaining or anything like that, because the sounds would come out like this, and you have some slight like editing chances and stuff, but there wouldn't be any side chaining. They kind of get glued together because of that. So if you're going for crazy side chaining stuff, you will sound more modern. Okay, so let's leave the side chaining a bit aside, and for this one, just do a slight dip to create some separation. So now we already said that the kick and bass are kind of fighting for some similar frequencies. They're kind of similar, and the bass drum sounds a bit dull. And I feel like it could have a bit more clear rhythm without harassing the bass that much. So let's look at a processing approach that you can use to fix that. First of all, obviously, we might want to grab an EQ. And let's just say, to get a nice clear click sound, instead of throwing a hi-hat or an extra element on top of the kick, let's just give it a nice high boost. Might seem crazy to do a big boost like that, but I would say it's crazier to do many small cuts and over engineer your sound and just say like, okay, I need some high frequencies. What does it sound like if I boost it up? Sounds okay. And if we now look at the scope, we see there's somewhat of a small peak happening, but it's not too crazy, and it's going to be chopped off a bit even more once we use saturation. All right, so I would stay basic for this one. And let's remove some of that boomy energy around 80 hertz, which is present in both sounds, and have the kick go a bit below the bass. Look. Because of the presence of the high end, I feel like the kick has a chance to cut through, and then the bass, it just gets moved slightly out of the way. But now let's look at how we can give even more character to the kick with saturation, and how EQ and saturation kind of have this interplay. I'm using Saturn FabFilter. The two saturation types I would recommend you to get to know are tube and tape distortion. Let's take a listen at this warm tube and what effect it has. Okay, we're really distorting the kick. It sounds like a bit more woody, right? Like this. And like that. There's not that much mid-range energy and high-end energy. Distortion will create overtones and kind of give us some mid and high frequency content that we can work with. Look at this, right? So it comes in. This is obviously made way too much, and depending on how much we drive it, how strong we do it, we will create some different sounding high and mid-range energies, frequencies. So something that you can do to actually kind of shape the sound of the high and mid frequencies that are coming out is throwing an EQ before. And but something that's also quite elegant way to kind of control how much saturation you will have in which area is controlling the sound before with your EQ. Because depending on how you EQ it, different signal goes into the saturation, different signal comes out. And see the difference? If we have this dip before the saturation, let's turn this off for a second and compare this just this. Go a bit more extreme so you can hear it clearly. Look. No EQ. Distorts very strong. Signal is also louder. EQ. It's less. Okay, so EQing your signal before your saturation tool gives you great flexibility to decide, okay, how you want your sound to be saturated. So let's go for this. Okay, and once you saturated the signal, you can add another EQ and say, okay, I'm now actually going to shape whatever is coming out of my saturation tool. And say, okay, all of this new energy is coming here, but I just want this part above here. And go back a bit more to the original sound. A, B. Yeah, so to sum things up, before you even get started, see what frequency content is present in your bass and kick, check the length of your kick drum and of your bass sounds, and then you can use something like an easy chain EQ going into saturation and to another EQ to manage the mid and high frequency content. And that's obviously specifically relevant for bass drum that can sound a bit dull, but if you're making house music, 909 bass drum will be there many, many times. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions, recommendations, follow up in the comments. I hope to see you around for the next video. Peace.